Hello everyone from the summit. I'm Mitch Moehring. I've been hosting all the luthier sessions during the summit, and I just want to give you a tour of my shop and then do a little bit of adjustments to the bridge that I think you can do. This is my hand tool workshop. I don't really use any power tools or anything in here. That way I can, do touch-up varnish if I need. This is a 3/4 base I'm making, and the base bar is dry fitted and get glued in soon. This is a 5/8 base top. The arching is finished, and now I just need to finish the graduations, and then it'll also get a base bar. So this gets chalk fitted to the inside and then glued with really thick high glue. Coming back to the power tool shop. In here, I have a lot of power tools that they're kind of like employees. They'll keep me working and be able to do this for the rest of my life. So I have things that control the thickness, make maybe a back thinner. This is a bandsaw for ripping huge pieces of lumber into base size lumber. Big sharpening station because clean woodwork starts with sharp tools. Here in the back corner, I have a drill press, and this is a little mini lathe that I can make like the Laborie end pins with, or turn down end pin collars. And then this is a nice old milling machine that I use to make like C extension parts and kind of rough out different parts of the base. So yeah, all right, we'll go back into the other room. Shop dog Maggie. Here's some of the bases I'm building right now. This is a walnut 3/4 base that the base bar is for. They're both flatbacks, and I like to do the Y bracing. There's so many different bracings you can do. Flatbacks generally have some kind of bracing. So this is the Y bracing. Sometimes you'll see like ladder bracing, and then Matthew Tucker's doing which you saw on the bass violin shop video. He does this responsive bracing, and it kind of looks like boomerangs in places to let the back flex. I just haven't done one yet. I will very soon though. Okay, let me show you this bass over here. As a player, there's times that maybe you're traveling and the bridge gets bumped. Maybe it gets pushed one way or the other, and I think it's really important for you to be able to know how to get it back in place and what the correct location is. So there's a couple things that have to do with that. I like to start with where it belongs in relation to the F-holes. Okay, so the side-to-side location. If you look, we have these notches on the F-holes, and if you drew a line from one notch to the other, you would want that cutting the bridge in half, okay? So what we don't want, and then sometimes there's different things that need to be taken into consideration, maybe the length of the neck handle. So sometimes you'll see it where the notches, are at the bottom, but I would say a general rule of thumb is that the notches are cutting the bridge in half. So what I like to use is just a piece of paper, because if you're on tour or you're at a gig, you always have a piece of paper, some kind of like a piece of music that you can use that's very straight. So I like to put the paper behind the bridge, and then you can take another piece of paper and put it here, but I usually use a ruler for myself in the shop. That way I can measure and make sure it's actually centered. Okay, so if you put the piece of paper there, you can see that the space here is equal to the space here. And so what we do not want is that the bridge is crooked, where you have a big gap on this side and a tiny gap on this side, okay? So this is what we want. Best way to move the bridge is to just take the string off. Maybe take 2 of the strings off. That takes half the tension down. Don't do them all, because we don't want the sound post to fall. So take 2 of the strings off, And then you can just kind of push the bridge foot into place. Okay, you can just kind of move it. In the shop, I use a wooden mallet and a little piece of wood, and I am just tapping to move the bridge into place. Okay. All right, so that's step one, getting the bridge in the right location in relation to the F-holes. The next step is to make sure the bridge is allowing your strings to be centered on the fingerboard. So, let me move all this stuff. If you come this angle, so if you look at the space on each side of the fingerboard, so the space between the G string and the end of the ebony and the E string and the end of the ebony, you want those about even. It's hard to ignore some of the shapes and thicknesses of the strings, but in general you want that space to be even. And I move it in the same way that I do back and forward. I just take a mallet, and if it has adjusters, I aim for the adjusters to move it into place. And then you need to recheck with your piece of paper to make sure that you're still centered with the F-hole notches. So that's how I move a bridge. That's how you know where it belongs. Something that you can do on a daily basis is to make sure your bridge is straight. So if you'll come on this side and just look forward, you want the angle from the top behind the bridge and the back of the bridge to be a right angle. So I'll show you a couple things we don't want. As you're tightening the strings, the bridge gets pulled towards the scroll or towards the fingerboard. This is what we do not want, okay? We don't want the bridge leaning. You can even see that there's a big gap on the front or on the back of the bridge foot right here. Okay, that means it's only touching right there in the front. That's not safe. It could create a crack. It could dent the varnish. So what we're gonna do, you can do this on your hotel bed, you can do this in the back of your tour van, whatever you have, okay? Just lay the base flat, and the way I do it, you can kind of rest your arms on the base, or you can just hold onto the strings and push the bridge forward, and then just keep checking. Take little baby steps. You can get behind the base and pull it towards you. Again, you're just doing little tiny movements because you don't want to go too far and the bridge fall flat. Okay? But this is something you can do every time you look at your base. Just keep an eye on it. Bridges are pretty expensive, and you don't want to have to get a new bridge just because you haven't kept an eye on the straightness. It'll get warped. Okay? And once it gets warped, all those cells in the wood, it's permanent. So there's things that you can do to get it by, but ultimately you're going to need a new bridge. So yeah, so that's how you keep an eye on your bridge and keep it straight and in the right spot. While I have you next to a base, let me show you the tail gut. This is how you want your tail gut to look. This is just a synthetic core tail gut. Sometimes they're metal, and sometimes they're plastic, but I really like this synthetic material. This is the way you want it to look. Where it's even with your center line, or sometimes that's off, so just have to think about the end pin collar traveling and kind of average that out. But what you do not want is for it to be wonky one way or the other, okay? Where both sides are kind of pulling in one direction. That's not what we want, okay? Wider is fine if they were more spread apart, but you don't want the tail gut to get pushed onto the top. That could create a crack if it were, a really strong metal cord, like a metal cable. But you really don't want that to happen. At least it would, mar the end or, chip up things right there. So just make sure it's even, okay, and that it's making a direct line to the tailpiece. Okay. All right. Well, I think that's all I have for you. Next, we're going to do a Q&A with various luthiers around the world. So stay tuned, and thanks for joining us on the summit.